Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into the text of Exodus chapter 12. We're going to uncover how one single incredibly high-stakes night of survival was basically engineered to forge the entire cultural identity of ancient Israel. It's a literal masterclass in how a culture is born out of a massive crisis. So let's see exactly how the source text lays this whole thing out. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. Right off the bat, we're not starting with a festive modern holiday here. We are looking at a genuinely terrifying historical narrative. We're talking about a dramatic countdown to a midnight plague of unprecedented scale. This wasn't just a tough time, this was a devastating event meant to completely break the will of an empire. And honestly, change a civilization forever.
Section 1. The Night of Judgment.
To really wrap our heads around the profound historical significance of this ancient text, we have to look at the immediate life-or-death crisis the Israelites were facing. The source captures the sheer massive scale of this 10th plague in just chilling detail. At midnight, judgment fell on every single Egyptian household. We're talking from the firstborn of Pharaoh sitting on his throne all the way down to the captive in the dungeon and even the livestock. It created such an immense, desperate outcry across Egypt that Pharaoh didn't even wait for the sun to come up. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the dead of night and urgently commanded the Israelites to just get up, take their flocks, and leave immediately. Section 2. The first Passover meal. Okay, let's dive into this. Before that chaotic, urgent escape actually happened, the text details a very specific, sensory-rich survival ritual that the Israelites had to follow. The source outlines these incredibly precise, methodical steps for preparing a crucial sacrifice. And honestly, it builds incredible tension. First, on the 10th day of the month, every man had to select an unblemished male lamb for his household. Then, they wait. They're told to keep it until the 14th day. Only then was the entire assembly to kill their lambs at twilight. But the absolute climax of this ritual? They had to take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in a basin of the lamb's blood, and literally paint the lintel and the 2 doorposts of the houses where they were eating. And the strict rule? No one goes out the door until morning. And the meal itself? Think about trying to eat a formal family dinner while fully dressed in your winter coat with your car keys in your hand. That's basically the posture required here. This was absolutely not a relaxed feast. It was an exercise in extreme readiness. The text specifically commands that the meat be roasted on the fire, not raw, not boiled. It had to be eaten with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And they had to eat it in extreme haste. Belts fastened, sandals on their feet, staffs in their hands. They were quite literally dressed and ready to sprint out the door at a moment's notice. And here's the crucial point. This wasn't just symbolic. This was a literal survival mechanism. The text states that the blood will be a sign, saying, "When I see the blood, I will pass over you." That blood, painted on the doorframe, was their definitive required sign of protection from the night's judgment. Section 3. The Great Exodus. The successful preservation of the Israelites that night immediately triggered their mass departure, an event famously known as the Exodus. 430 years. That is exactly how long the text states the people of Israel lived in Egypt. But when that moment of departure finally hit, it happened so incredibly fast that they couldn't even wait for their bread to rise. The Egyptians were practically pushing them out the door in total haste, terrified they would all die. So the Israelites just took their unbaked dough, bound up their kneading bowls in their cloaks, threw them on their shoulders, and were thrust out of the country. To really put the massive scale of this sudden migration into perspective, the text gives us some pretty wild figures. Roughly 600,000 men on foot journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth. And remember, that number is just the men. That doesn't include the women, the children, what the text calls a mixed multitude that went up with them, or the vast flocks and herds of livestock. Think about the sheer logistical nightmare of moving well over 1 million people, plus animals, overnight with zero notice. This was a historically massive movement of people. What's really striking about this moment is the sudden, complete shift in power dynamics. On their way out the door, the Israelites do what Moses instructed and basically just asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. The text notes that the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. So the Egyptians, who were terrified and totally desperate for them to leave, just handed over whatever they asked for. By doing this, the text says, they effectively plundered their former captors right on their way out.
Section 4. A lasting cultural memorial.
Let's move to the final piece and see how this all builds, because the true historical significance here lies in how this visceral, panicked escape was systematically transformed into a permanent cultural institution for ancient Israel. The very first step in forging this new cultural identity was a complete structural reset. The text says, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months." Think about how profound that is. They fundamentally restarted their entire calendar. From that moment on, their whole measurement of time was anchored to this specific event of deliverance. This event was immediately ordained as a memorial day and a statute forever. To permanently cement this into the culture, they were required to strictly observe the 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread. For a full 7 days, absolutely no leaven was to be found anywhere in their houses. And the stakes for maintaining this cultural memory, they were incredibly high. If anyone ate what was leavened during those 7 days, that person was completely cut off from the nation of Israel. It was a strict zero-tolerance policy for forgetting. This new cultural institution also established very specific sociological boundaries. There was a clear-cut rule about exactly who could participate in the Passover meal. A foreigner or a hired worker, they could not eat it. However, if a slave bought with money or a stranger living with them wanted to keep the Passover, there was a strict condition. All the males in that household had to undergo the rite of circumcision first. Only then could they draw near and participate, essentially becoming like a native of the land. The text makes it super explicit, saying there shall be one law for the native and for the stranger. It ensured one unified law for the entire community. Ultimately, what's so fascinating about this source is that it reveals this ritual was intentionally designed for transmission. The leaders knew that for a culture to survive long-term, its origin story absolutely must be passed down. This wasn't just a meal, it was a carefully constructed teaching tool designed to ensure the story of their deliverance became the absolute bedrock for all future generations. The text literally scripts out a future conversation. It anticipates the curiosity of the youth when they finally settle in a new land. By mandating this specific question to be asked by children in the future, "What do you mean by this service?" The text built a permanent, interactive educational framework directly into the culture itself. The parents were instructed to reply that it's the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, explaining how he passed over their houses in Egypt. This guaranteed the Israelites would never forget who they were, where they came from, or exactly how they survived. We've seen today how a terrifying night of survival was meticulously engineered into a lasting cultural identity through new calendars, strict boundaries, and passed-down rituals. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to consider. How do the ancient stories, the strict social boundaries, and the repeated rituals of our own modern cultures continue to subconsciously define exactly who we are today? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I encourage you to keep questioning the foundations of the world around you.